it now works in different function from the initial idea, and now there are municipal government is located there, but at the moment of its construction in 20th century, it was the home for the Soviet government at that moment. And this building carries a lot of personal stories and a lot of all retrospective stories about the people that worked there before and now. And actually, Tatjana and Matilda have spent a lot of time in this building filming. I'd like to introduce Tatjana and Matilda. They are both directors of these movies, of this movie. They have met in German Film and Television Academy. Tatjana is now in Tbilisi, even though she has also spent a lot of time in Berlin. She has also made other films except for the building, and most of them are immersed into the history topic. Matilda was also a student of German Film and Television Academy, except for being a director. She's also the DOP of this movie. Tatjana, Matilda, hi. Let's get to the conversation. I have a lot of questions for you today. And I'd like to start with the question, not about the filmmaking, but just your impressions and your reflection about the online streaming of film festival, as it is a very new experience for filmmakers. How are you feeling in the self-isolation and this lockdown? And how do you think, is the world really changing right now? What can you say about this?
Well, of course, we would have preferred to be in Kiev. We were looking very much forward to it, and I think we both believe that cinema should be watched in a dark room together with other people. And I think we have also felt on our own bodies with this film that we're presenting today that it really does make a difference to watch it in a cinema. So because it needs to be experienced with the body, I think. But of course, it's a lot better than nothing to be able to do it like this. We're very happy to be here.
I can only support Matilda because I'm one of those directors that see the filmmaking as a location. I think that in-person communication is very important here, and I think that in movies and filmmaking, you can have this experience, a different subjective experience, when you are in the same room with different people and you feel their personal impact, their own impression and thoughts. And lockdown is lockdown. I haven't really figured out for myself yet how important and how necessary it is, in fact, how much of a threat it is for us. And I think that we will not stay in the digital world. We will come back to the offline life. The question is, what is going to happen to the society after this? We have a lot of questions, including the economic system. Do we need to change it? How do we adapt to this? How do we organize the society after this? There's a lot of thoughts about it, but it's really, I think it's early to make any kind of assumptions about any kind of radical changes. Okay, let's get to the conversation about movie itself. I'd like to remind that the viewers can ask their questions. Please feel free to send us your questions over YouTube and Facebook, and we'll be able to ask our directors. I would like to start from the historical point of view. The movie uses archive footage as the building itself was built in the 20s, and it was quite a controversial era of history of the world in general and Soviet Union in particular. At the same time, the building, the Derzhprom building itself was so important for this epoch and this whole time that it has been in many movies so far. So I'm gonna start Tatjana first. Let's say Dziga Vertov, his movies have featured this building. And why am I talking about this is because the plot of the movie is about the 1917th revolution and the soldier that lost his memory in those conditions. And when it was shot, it was about the time when the revolution happened in Ukraine and the decommunization was going on. So there was kind of a juxtaposition of that. So, how did the avant garde projects and art from the 20s have influenced you and inspired you in this work? I'm gonna give a small remark. About my Ukrainian. I have learned Ukrainian language after I came back from Berlin in the years of the Maidan. So I'm kind of translating from German to Ukrainian in my head right now. So I apologize for any mistakes that I may make. Regarding the movie itself and the 20s, we definitely watched everything we could, and the process has involved not only the shooting the footage, but also a lot of preparation. We watched a lot of movies together and movies of Eisenstein, New and Old, General Line, also Dziga Vertov. We talked to Michael Ricklin, who teaches Soviet history in a little different way, and he divides it into two stages, one between 1917 and 1929, and the other stage is from 1929. And the constructivism as a concept was very important for us in this work. We were trying to understand what was it, and because, for example, the architects of this building, they were not constructivists as artists. Serafimov, I think, was teaching cubism in St. Petersburg, and he was not really directly attached to that. So, but they still were able to reflect this concept. So we were really trying to figure out what constructivism is, and also what is Russian avant-garde and Ukrainian avant-garde, and how they differ among themselves, including the literary work, the movements among authors, because it was not homogeneous. There were a lot of branches. I think it's a mistake to say that all of it was homogeneous and went into one direction. However, there were a lot of artistic groups. For example, Kharkiv had around 10 groups that had very different views on the movement itself. So I think it was a part of a research. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question directly regarding the Debrisiv Empire. What was really interesting for me was it shows a place where it comes back in St. Petersburg, but they show the architecture was not in St. Petersburg. So they show Derzhprom building, which was in Kharkiv. However, the film fragment of Empire shows it at St. Petersburg. There's also, I'm not sure about the name of the movie. I think it's called The House of Culture in Minsk. And it shows sort of a mosaic of different buildings in different places. And I think it reflects the policy of Soviet Union. They really have built just a few constructivist buildings in the whole Soviet Union, because basically by the 1929 the constructivism was over. So they were trying to build this virtual dimension, the buildings, the space that has never built. However, the movies as documentaries were showing it as real and was supposed to be this kind of parallel reality that we were moving to. It wasn't an accident, as it was a clear program of creating this parallel reality of Soviet Union.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to talk to Matilda. You were born in Ukraine, Tatjana, but why, Matilda, are you interested in the subject? And why do you think that Soviet narratives are like narrative or worthy of discussion? Matilda, you faced this risk because you came here to film, because you as a person from Europe, you could introduce some, I don't know, other colonial perspective. How did you handle this? How did you address this in this film?
Yeah, I'll try to. Of course, I'm a foreigner in Ukraine, and I don't understand Russian, and I don't understand Ukrainian. I think, as far as my interest in the subject goes, it definitely predated the film. I think also it has to do with the group of students that we were at the time. I think it's safe to say that maybe Tatjana was kind of the igniter of this interest, but it definitely is also an interest that was there in a group of students that discussed these things, and the inspiration that I think there's a lot of political and aesthetical inspiration to find in the 20s in the Soviet Union. And of course, I mean, apart from obviously also I think the revolution is still inspiring, even though of course there's a lot more to say about it. But and I think when you look at the avant-garde art of this period, it's so fresh still, and I think it's still inspiring. Just I think the basic notion that art, the way art can be connected to politics, and that it is not that the aesthetic sphere is not some kind of a gaseous thing floating in the sky, metaphysical, but something that has to do with the political and the real world. I think that's just kind of the basic interest, or still very the contemporary aspect of it. Then the other part of your question is how, as a European, although I must say I'm sort of a mixture of this and that. My father is American and my mother is Danish. I spent 10 years in Berlin. I don't really identify with any particular nationality or group in a very deep sense, I would say. But of course, I was very aware of being the outsider and what it means to look at people and a place from the outside. And I think you have to be very humble about it. And I think I naturally stepped in a sort of remote position, and I think you can probably see it in the images from not understanding the language. You're kind of forced in a way to be over over focused on movement and sound and light and the everything beyond language. And then I also must say that I was surprised how much, without understanding what people say, you can still feel what kind of people they are. Often I would kind of maybe not be quite sure of like what was happening there. I would talk to Tatjana afterwards, and often I would realize, okay, actually the gut feeling that you have in the situation is actually often quite right, even though you don't understand the specifics of language. That was an interesting experience.
Yeah, speaking about the people in your film, because this film not only links to epochs, but it also links constructivism with its interest in geography, in geometry, and modern documentary. So this film tells micro stories, and there are a lot of protagonists in the film. And my question to both of you is the following. After all, it's believed to be a complicated time, the Soviet past, that is, because these works of art are worthy of attention, but it's a time of authoritarian rule that has a lot of negative imprint. What is your personal attitude towards the Soviet Union? How did you interact with your own feelings regarding this? I think I can start with this question. And to add to the previous, it's interlinked. Matilda and I talked a lot about this. But about this position of being an external. I was born in Ukraine, but lived almost 20 years in Germany. I spent my childhood in Germany in a Soviet military house, but it was still the USSR, and we talked a lot about it. How do we handle this position, this perspective, so as not to attach interpretation to what we see? Therefore, it's like Matilda and Bruno and Phil, and I was there initially, but during the editing phase, they only left my voice. So this perspective is not without body, but this perspective does have a body, and this is the body. And Matilda can say that it's like my alter ego in the film, because it's her and myself simultaneously, because we worked very closely together, and tying this perspective to a personality and making it as subjective as possible. On the question about the Soviet times, the ideology, did we ask our protagonists about it? We tried to distill ideology from art. I mean, like the party policies and artists who had their own take on the revolution, on the change in society. But in Ukraine, we see it a lot with the Maidan case too. Initially, it might be one thing, but then it becomes different things. You know, trying to understand where one is linked to another. We try to demonstrate it somehow, not directly though, through words, but indirectly through editing. As for our characters who we film, we did not ask them questions about the Soviet times. This was not my interest, for example. Rather, I was interested in seeing their lives inside this building. They spent a lot of time there. I wanted to film something they wanted us to film. I mean, I did not ask them questions like, tell something about yourself. Rather, we were there and we spent host of time there, like 10 hours a day. We ate there, we filmed there, we sat there, and we just talked, chatted to these people. We told a lot about us. In the film, you see that they ask us more than the other way around. And this was even a form of friendship. Because we were in touch afterwards and they're asking, how are you doing? And I talked back to them. I mean, we started coming there in the evening without camera, just spending time with them, bringing them something, spending time with them. For example, there is the sequence where Nina is reciting a poem. It wasn't planned at all. We came to pop at her place, and then after everything, she just I mean, not her place, but it was like this rooms where the staff members are allowed to rest in this building of the House of Industry. So when their shift is over, and their shift is 24 hours, so this is the place where they can get some rest. Yeah, so Nina brought some food and offered it to us, and we had a meal, and then she said, I also write poems. And we say, oh, do you? And there you go, we started filming. So she started reciting and we filmed it. And the sound was terrible because we didn't have a mic and the camera was small. And this is how the sequence appeared. The combination was important for me. This combination between something that is a day-to-day, daily lives. I mean, people live in that space. And combining it with something the space was supposed to be politically and ideologically, and from the perspective of the arts. So these are three distinct categories. Right. Matilda, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think the Soviet Union, I guess, is also a different Soviet Union in the 20s than it was later on. And I think there's a reason why we mainly look to the 20s for something that can still maybe the utopian energy that I think can still inspire us now, and to also, yes, to separate, not just to say everything is the Soviet Union, but to differentiate between the different periods. And then I would also add that I think there's something about the present and the time you're living in yourself and the reality and all its eventlessness of everyday life compared to these big something as big as a revolution. And I think that's also something, going to this building every day and these very small everyday things that are happening, and trying to figure out, is there any way, does this past have anything to do with us now? Is there any possibility that this gathering of seemingly non-important events that you witness, are we still part of history? Is history still there, or are we just witnessing this everyday life passing by? And I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear, but I think kind of the clash between these two realities and the thoughts that we had thinking about the revolution and thinking about the possibility of a new society, thinking about what was in the past and being in this present. I think that's kind of the tension, hopefully, that's also visible in the film.
Thank you for this comment. I think for me, when I was watching the film, I think it was really well balanced. This utopic concept, your subjective influence to that, and also your abstinence from it and letting it be as it is. I think it played out very well and it makes the movie really, really interesting. I also have just recalled and wanted to say that, wanted to speak about the movie, Tatjana's movies, including Medea. As I know, Matilda is also, I think Matilda has also participated in that, and I believe that it also had this concept of connecting different time and the same place. I really wanted to ask you about this cooperation with Kharkiv, because this is a very interesting city in Ukraine, because it was Ukrainian Soviet capital for a certain time, and you have included a very diverse range of people in Kharkiv. And what is your relationship with Kharkiv? As I understand, you have filmed before Maidan. I would say that maybe Matilda will start, because we have quite different stories in this one.
The question was, what was, I'm sorry, our relationship to Kharkiv? Or because it was before Maidan, that was the?
Yes, correct.
Well, I think we very quickly realized, like when we were filming, we knew that that we would use archive material, and also that we were filming ourselves with different materials, with the 16mm, with the high-8 camera, and the digital. So it was always an intention of ours to blur the boundaries between archive material and contemporary the material, but we realized only a few months after we had concluded shooting that very quickly everything was archive material, because Kharkiv, of course, everything changed after the Maidan, and as far as I remember, it was August when we were there the last time, and so it was very few months before. If that answers the question. I'm not sure.
Maybe I can. First of all, we've been there twice, in 2012 and 2013. And in 2012, we have not known the location at all. I have only visited it once before, in March of 2012. I've spent about a week there, I think. And then when we visited in June for about 3 weeks, we were just renting an apartment, a regular apartment in a city center, and we met a lot of people. We have not only hanged out with people that work at Derzhprom, we have just met people that lived in the same building, some friends that we had, some artists. As well as Hamlet, Zinkovsky, as well as the students that went to the university where we sometimes went to get our lunch. They're also in the movie, actually, in one part in the beginning. And it was the first stage of the film, and we were trying to figure out what the movie is going to be about. And we created a lot of footage, and we were trying to see what is going on inside and out the building. And we were filming, I think, in September. I think it was September 1st, when the student parade that takes place in Kharkiv every year, it's kind of this massive spectacular event in Kharkiv that dates back to Soviet Union, and it was kind of just a bunch of fragments to me. I was not really understanding how would I put it together. We were also filming these night wolves, split-in night wolves with Soviet flags. So before Maidan, it was kind of different. The focus of the city was really different. There was a lot of Soviet in Kharkiv that was still living. And then I was working with some archives in Moscow with some archive footage that I found there, as well as I did in Kiev and Pshenichny archive. The focus started to shift, and I started to understand that it was not only the fragments of the Soviet Union heritage, we also needed to go further and deeper, because it was really hard to understand for me personally what was the Soviet heritage, the Soviet times that my mother and my grandmother went through. And 1920s Soviet times were so different, and there were so many stages between that time and our time. And I had this thought of kind of mixing together the fiction and documentary. So I was thinking about mixing it together and sort of combining the fiction with a documentary movie. Because there's this anarchist group in Ukraine that have found the diaries of Ukrainian anarchists from the beginning of 20th century, and they had this idea of planting a bomb in this building, in the Derzhprom building, and it would start the revolution, which actually took place. And we had this footage. We filmed it, but we didn't use it. And I have filmed a lot of other stuff in Kharkiv as well. I've moved to Ukraine after Maidan. I think I've still have been in Berlin for the first few months of Maidan because I was working there. I had to make money. So I was making money in Berlin and then taking a break and going back to Kiev and then back and forth. And then in February, I moved to Kiev for good. So I kept visiting Kharkiv and shooting there. I have a lot of footage from the demonstration and protests in Kharkiv. Actually, I almost got into conflict with a demonstration of Yanar Anar, and they almost broke my camera. But I was asking myself whether this should be a part of the movie, and we figured out that it should not be a part of this film, because we would have to make a film which would last not hour and a half, but 3, and we would have to give way more context. How would we be able to tell the story of Maidan but not talk about the 30s? How would we speak about Maidan but not talk about what happened after the Second World War? But I didn't want to just mention it in the movie just because it was so different. And I still have this question, how did it all start? Where did I start myself? Where's this beginning? Because the idea of constructivism and those works that the artists have created in Ukraine in the beginning of the 1920s, including Dziga Vertov. They are also, I don't know how much is Soviet in them. There's a lot of about equality, about human rights in them. There is not much Stalinism in there. And, you know, I really separate these things. Well, thank you, Tatjana. I think we all understand why it is so important. I also wanted to remind that you, the viewers, can pose the questions to the directors. I will mention them later, but I also wanted to ask you first about how you met. As I understand that it happened in Germany in Film and Television Academy. And I really wanted to ask you about this educational establishment, the University of this Academy, and how important it is in Germany and in Europe in general. Matilda, would you like to start?
Well, as a matter of fact, I hope the director of our school is not listening. Well, the school doesn't have a director right now. I think actually, to be honest, I think the great luck we had when we went to film school was that there wasn't really much. There was a long period for any. There was, in the beginning, we had some teachers that were very important, and I'm not saying that teachers are not important. I certainly had some very important teachers in film school, but there was an element of having no directors, like the director of the school. I mean, not director in the film director sense. And we were a group of students who kind of didn't have to please anyone or try to get the acceptance of some old man with gray hair. We just had to. We had the equipment and we had each other, and I think in a way that was our great luck. That we looked more to what we could learn from each other than what someone with their experience would try and teach us.
But we actually met when we were taking part in protests. When I started my studying, Matilda was already in the school for a year, so she was majoring in, she was studying to be a director of photography, and I started my studies a year later. We haven't known each other before that. And I think there were a lot of protests in the academy. Hartman Bitovsky, the director, the head of the academy, has quit his position. And there was an attempt to appoint the head of the academy that the students were not on the same page with. We had the students and the appointed head have had very different views on how the teaching should be conducted. So we almost for a year, the academy did not have the director, the head of the academy. So it took little time to create a group of people. I think it was just like 10 of us. It was Matilda, Jan Bachman, Julian Reidermeier. If Max Lenz, Oleksandr Koberidze, who also had a really great movie last year, Gio Krokashvili, Alexis Valls. So it was about 10 people in the group, and we were against the proposed policy. We had a lot of people who supported us, but at the end of the day, it was just about 10 people that stayed in the group. And we started thinking about how we can change the way of filmmaking is. What we were doing, we didn't really like it because we didn't want to tell, as we used to call them, the bourgeois stories with some feelings and all the emotional, all the emotions that they usually feature. So we were focusing more on archives, and we were trying to figure out how the school has started in the 60s. And we reflected a lot on Alexander Teliuk movies. Yeah, we started watching the films together and discussing them, and we had a few professors like Martin Marczewski, who was very important in the perception of life and film as not the art for elite, but the art that can change, that can impact the views and the perception of reality. And this is how we met with Matilda. So we spent a lot of time together, and this school, this academy was and still is very important in Europe and Germany in general. But I think that now it's taken up this neoliberal path, so we're not really sure about its future. It used to be the school where Faraki used to teach and where Berlin School was created, even if they did not call themselves like that. But it's a good question, what is going on there now?
Thank you for introducing your references. That was one of my questions, actually. So you say this is your graduation film. We also have the audience questions here. So I'm trying to, in the interest of time, to single out the common topics. Question. Did you and your heroes have any conflict during the filming? Next question. The story of the building turned into the story of the people who preserve the spirit of that building. Am I right in thinking that? That was the question from the audience member. So if you could answer those questions, please. Matilda, do you want to take those or?
Start with the last one, maybe. Yes, I think whoever asked that is right. I think that's exactly what happened. We went there thinking that we were going to make maybe some kind of architecture film, and somehow ended up being maybe a little bit more interested in the people there, or at least just as interested in the people as in the building. But it wasn't planned, and I think Tatjana has already also described how most of the time they came to us, and some of it is also caught on camera, how they turn literally from facing with the back to the camera and turning to the camera and talking to us and wanting to show, to present themselves in that manner. And in a way, I think that has also been the conclusion of our thoughts about what is the connection between us and the people who lived almost 100 years ago, and the deeds that they have done, is that it starts with us, the people. Of course, a house is built by people, and deeds are made by people. So I think that is also the conclusion that we came to, but not one that we set out to illustrate or had beforehand, at least not consciously in that way. It evolved with the filming.
I'll also start with the second question. Matilda basically covered it. Just to add, we have a lot of these intellectual conversations, but it was intuitive too. and we wanted it to be intuitive. I mean, we didn't want to have this intellectual concept and sort of force it upon or look imagery for the imagery that can be an illustration of that. I mean, we did the research. We wanted to know what's out there. I mean, we wanted to look at everything there was. It's like a portrait of a person. Find out everything about this person, and then you come and sort of wait for what happens. So then the things that happened. And as Matilda says, it's done by people. It doesn't just happen in and of itself. There's a person who's doing things, and you need to celebrate those people too and respect them. Yeah, I have respect for all these people. On your first questions about the conflict, right? Whether we had conflicts with people who were filmed, we had none. I mean, didn't have conflict at all. There were questions, but we never filmed in a location that was prohibited for filming. I mean, we didn't have any sort of authorization or paper saying, yes, we're authorized to film here. I mean, we didn't behave like this. I mean, we just came in and asked, like, can we stay here for a while and film here for a while? And the question was, what? And like, where are we allowed to look? Where aren't we? There was this one incident when Matilda and Bruder were on their own and there was some repair work and the guys didn't understand what they were being told. And people who were doing the renovation started, we filmed it because these guys started being really aggressive with Matilda and with Bruno. So they just switched the camera off and that is it. Because this wasn't our intention to. I mean, initially people were quite reserved because they thought that we're journalists and we want to look for things, for conflicts or tensions. But as we progressed, I think 5 days in or 3 days in, they realized that we're just there. And we film it only if they want it to be filmed. Thank you. One more question from the audience about working with archives. You have some archive footage in your film. So you used the Moscow archives. Is it right? And generally, could you elaborate on your working with archive? Alexander, I was working in Moscow. In archive, I saw a lot of them, and I was looking at Pshenichny archive, and this material is from the Pshenichny archive. I did not use the Moscow material because Maidan events started. I didn't even ask them because I didn't want to. I didn't know what their answer is going to be. And generally, the Pshenichny archive, it's almost the same, with the exception of Zygavertov. But we decided not to use Eisenstein or the Fragment of Empire by Ermler because it's recognizable. We rather wanted to work with material that was more sort of that was not artistic in quality. There is some TV footage as well from A to B that we used. Okay, for those who don't know, the Pshenichny archive is located in the city of Kiev and the district of Solominka. We also wanted to ask you about your further plan. Do you plan to film more in history in your next films or maybe address the Soviet time? And a question for Matilda. To the best of my knowledge, she doesn't only work with fictional, but also with documentaries and other genres. So what are your plans for further films? Do you plan to do a collaboration again, or are you going to work separately on your films? Matilda?
Well, actually, currently I am editing a film that I shot, actually, or material that I shot several years ago now, but which also deals with history, but with history in Denmark. A small post-industrial town in the southern part of Denmark called Nakskov, which also I had the good fortune to have access to a small local archive there, and deals with the retired workers from the two main. There was a big where they make ships, and the sugar factory that were the main workplaces, or kind of the heart of the town, and up until more or less the 80s, with the ship production, which really was the biggest place. And yeah, so this is what I am working on, and so it fits well to a Corona time where you're forced to be inside and not outside in the real world.
Well, what I can say is that I asked Matilda like a week ago, does she want to work in the next project with me? She said, ask me next year about it. You know, planning something now, especially shooting a film, is like planning a documentary on Mars or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm working on a new project. And I will resort to history. But it's resorting to my history. Even if the house, state industry, Derzhprom, it's a building. I think this film is more about, well, even though this film is personal film, I mean, it's about my family. It's about questions for my family. And there is a photo in this building, an archive photo. I don't know if you've seen this woman. She's standing on a plaza. When I saw this photo, this could have been my grandmother. And this was my question. How did she live? She died when I was 7. She died on my birthday. So my next film will be about her. But I don't know yet. I don't know any details. It's a journey, so we'll see. The intrigue remains, though. Are you going to be experimental, or is it going to be a fiction film? I wanted to quote the interview, Tatjana's quote for a festival newspaper, is that you shouldn't be tempted by nice imagery and nice techniques. That cinema is much more than image. Provocative questions. How far can you go in this? How far can you focus on creating reality without paying due regard to the image? So I just basically want to ask you about your filmmaking method. What is your method? Could you describe it? How do you see your filmmaking? Oleksandr, reality is not something I construe through filming. I don't create reality. When I talk about reality, sorry, Oleksandr, you can see the quote marks here. I mean, what is reality generally? It's a difficult question. How many realities are there? Because a person who constructed the Derzhprom had a different reality as opposed to someone who drafted this construction design. And this was a different reality from those, from the reality of Dzerzhinsky, whose ideology was underpinned by this building. So it's a complicated question about reality. I think filmmaking as art, it's like art, it's like literature. For example, we know that literature is always a form. Even if it's some kind of witness statement, it is written, it is created. There's some logic that was construed. Same story with the filmmaking. The film creates its own reality. I'm not talking about it as a false reality or fiction. I mean, the films that I am interested in are, it's a little bit difficult to explain it, but when you watch such a film, there's some kind of space between you as audience member and the film itself. And within that space, there's movement. So there's space for interpretation of the imagery. Not to say that the creator of that film doesn't have any of those interpretations, but it's like a gap where you might get this feeling of what could have happened. So filmmaking for me is more about the questions than the answers. So I love working, or this is what I'm interested in, creating these questions. So when I know the answers and when I know the form, then I lose interest in doing this. Even now, at the beginning of my project, I don't know what form of this film will be. And I don't know the final answer either. Likewise, when we worked in the building of Derzhprom, this so-called reality has its own form. That's why it's such a heterogeneous film. Not because we lack one style, but because each of those situations required its own form. So, and it was intuitive choice of that form, and then it all came together. You can't film a building and architecture in the same way that you film a person. These are different things. For example, we did this material of 16 millimeters. So when this was material 16 millimeters, and then we asked, what do we want to film with this material? And there was a point. I mean, it cost a lot of money, the material, working with this. So what do we want to devote this material to? To the people or to the concrete? We decided it was the people. But when you need to do the angle, that would have been impossible with a different camera. So 16 millimeters have their own limitations and a possibility to do different framing, but most of the materials is for the people.
Thank you for your answer. We actually need to wrap up, but I also wanted to hear Matilda about her contribution and her feelings about this.
Well, I think that's one of the main reasons that I like to mix formats apart from archive or a mixture of format that comes from a mixture of time. But I think it's like up until recently, the 35 millimeter image had this status of being almost a mirror of reality or some kind of one-to-one truth. It had a certain, and then also I think certain artistic tradition that imbued it with this faith in the image as Abdruck, like an imprint of reality. And I think one of the main reasons for me for what happens when you mix these different formats is that it makes it very obvious that the image is not reality, and anyway, what do you mean by reality? There's no reality that is like accessible to us outside our own consciousness, and there's a very big difference between what you see with your eyes and what it is to be a human being going through reality and an image. And I think if this kind of movie making where you're very aware that it is a construction, and I don't mean construction as opposed to reality, because everything in our human reality, I'm not talking about science, but anything that has to do with politics or society is very much a construction. And I think just maybe this is a good point to wrap up, that is a very inspiring and important point that the constructivists had, that this parallel between creating art that makes it visible that the art is a construction also empowers us to say, well, actually, everything is in a construction means that we can change it. We can change society. Society is a construction. There's no law that says anything within the human realm can be changed. And yeah.
Matilda, Tatjana, thank you so much for your answers. Thank you for your amazing film. To you guys that haven't seen the film yet, you can watch it until tomorrow, 6 p.m. at docuspace.org. It's free of charge. Once again, thank you to everyone who watched us. Follow the DocuDays. Thank you for your questions. And I also like to thank DocuDays for this opportunity to talk about our film.